Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wisdom Chats. This is the place for groundbreaking ideas, inspiration, and heart connection. I am Susie Verde, and today we have a very special guest. He is a man of, I would say, so many gifts. His name is Rob Williams. And I am so delighted that he has accepted my invitation to be a guest. Rob has a very unique path. He has been in the corporate world many years, but he has always been a very old and inspired and spiritual being. At one point, he had a revelation, and he decided to then take a very sharp turn and follow a call that has led him to receive what we're going to be talking about, which is the revelation of a technique. I wouldn't say a technique, maybe a set of practices and principles called PSYCH-K, which is, I'm delighted to introduce to you today. So enough said. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor, a privilege.
Well, the same to you, Susie. As a matter of fact, when we met, as you said earlier this year, it was quite an honor meeting you, somebody who has this deep insight into what's going on in the world and a larger picture than just each of us individually, but also collectively. There's a massive change going on, a massive shift going on in the world, and we're all part of it. Some of us are more conscious of it than others, but nevertheless, you're a part of it. In this particular epoch of change, we're coming to a conclusion of a very large cycle. We'll talk about that later, but I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate the opportunity to give a voice to PSYCH-K as the work that I believe is sacred work that was given to me now almost 30 years ago when I did leave the corporate world. And you're right, it was a spiritual quest that haunted me. The making of money was necessary at that time in my life, of course, and as it still is to a certain degree, but it's not the driving force in my life. It's never been. And that's the reason in my early corporate days, it was 14 years in various corporate positions, they all were very good ways to make a living, but they weren't good ways to feed my soul. And that haunted me. And eventually I simply had to make a choice to take a leap of faith out of a certain income and into an uncertain income, but absolute certain spiritual path. And that's why I did what I did. And when I did that, then the universe responded in kind and gave me the sacred work that I feel that I get to do. It's a privilege to do it on the planet. And that's what I shared with you in Taos, New Mexico when we met at the retreat center.
Yes. It was wonderful. And, Rob, what for me was very special about PSYCH-K was the fact that I always heard you talking about PSYCH-K as a very powerful catalyst of change, a very powerful instrument for helping people to change beliefs, self-limiting beliefs that were hindering them of having a better life, a more fulfilling life, a more joyful life. And I know this is what a lot of people actually experience these days. But PSYCH-K, it was not exactly the traditional New Age sort of path to think positive and perhaps be clear about what it is that you want to get as a mean of moving states. Seems like PSYCH-K was always a much more intriguing and deeper version of what that means. So could you share a little bit with us how you see PSYCH-K after 30 years now working?
Sure. Well, as you said, it is really very different than the sort of early mechanisms in self-help, which were positive thinking, affirmations, willpower, and so on. Getting clear about your goals and all of that. It's not that that's useless. It's important. But then there's the next step. The problem with that, just getting consciously aware of things and dealing with them by trying to positively think them into a different state, Works for some people sometime, but for me personally, it was largely disappointing. I found that both from myself and my own personal journey, it left me wanting. Oftentimes I was affirming something, and then if something came my way that I could connect to whatever it is I wanted and was trying to visualize or internalize and feel and all of those things that were the early days of this self-help movement, I found out that sometimes I got a little bit of what I thought I was asking for or what I tried to ask for, but very often it was not, it didn't match very well with what I was asking. It's sort of like, be careful what you ask for because you'll get it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, one of the elements of PSYCH-K, as you know from having taken the first course in PSYCH-K, that if you're not really clear in language that the subconscious mind can understand, and I'll talk more about that here shortly, that's the mind that has all the power. That's the one that does the law of attraction stuff. And that is the powerful part of us that puts out a message to the universe, if you will, to other beings and other minds, and says, this is what I want. And if you're not clear at that level, and there are some very important distinctions between being clear consciously and being clear with the subconscious mind. Most of the time, people don't have any idea that they're even different minds. Most people don't have any idea they have a subconscious mind.
Yeah.
Turns out, in today's neuroscience, the latest understanding is that part of our mind, which you could also call the habit part. In other words, it's the part of the mind that runs the everyday life. You get up in the morning, you have your habits, you run those habits. Habits, by definition, are things you don't even think of. They happen automatically. So you could call it the automatic mind. Whatever you call it, the important thing is to say it's running all the time. And as it turns out, current neuroscience has identified that it's running our lives. About 95 to 99% of the time, your actions and thoughts and all that are actually originating at the subconscious level, below the level of your conscious awareness. That's what sub means. Sub is below. The level of your conscious awareness where you think you have all this free will. Basically, you're on autopilot. All of us are on autopilot to some degree or another, and mostly hugely. Like
so here's a question for you that I always been very intrigued about, which I think PSYCH-K offers some beautiful answers. So if we're talking about a part of our minds that is largely dominated by, or shall we say, exists in the subconscious level, then how it is that you would know what it is that you believe? Because if it's unconscious by its very nature, you wouldn't know. And so, you know, like we're talking about this enormous iceberg of content that you actually don't even know you believe on. So how could you notice something? The eye of the observer would be very, very, very limited. Wouldn't you say so? And what PSYCH-K could do to help somebody to become more aware of what it is that he or she believes?
Well, good news is the answer is very simple. Very simple.
Lovely. Lovely.
You know what your subconscious mind believes by the behaviors you see in your life. Your behaviors are just outpictured beliefs. So how you behave, say, in relationships to other people, or around health issues, or money issues, or self-esteem issues. How do you treat yourself? How do you think about yourself? It's your behaviors that let you know what your beliefs are. You don't have to know in an intellectual way what your beliefs are. You can see them being outpictured in the universe every single day. Every thought you have in your mind. If you stop and just become aware of what they're thinking, most of the thinking is negative self-talk, as it turns out. Very high percentage of thoughts tend to be of that variety. Those are your beliefs. You don't need to know them and articulate them per se in PSYCH-K. That's the other good thing. You just need to know, okay, this behavior is not serving me. You don't even have to know why. You don't have to know where it came from or when you got it or whether one of your parents said some bad things to you when you were a kid or you were put down by an authority figure or any of the traumas you may have experienced in your life that create belief systems which then reside at the subconscious level and you print them out relentlessly, usually for most people the rest of their lives, because they don't have any idea how to change those beliefs.
It's what you call the prison, right? The real prison that captures us.
Limiting
Yep,
beliefs. That's what I
yep,
call
yep.
it.
Yeah, I love that. But there's also another element that maybe you're keeping it as a surprise for later, but I would like to bring it up because I think it's something very, very unique about Psyche, which is the possibility of inviting spirit in. And because most paths would talk about conscious and subconscious, but not necessarily higher consciousness, which you refer to as spiritual, the higher consciousness, the universal mind, the spiritual mind. So if all you have is conscious and unconscious, where this higher inspiration is coming from?
The higher inspiration, in my opinion, is who you actually are. The rest of it is just your personality. It's just how you play out your spirit in physical reality. So if you think of it as, we call it the superconscious mind. So there's a subconscious mind, meaning below the level of conscious awareness, your conscious mind, which is the part most people think they are. They don't even know that there are other minds involved because it's the part that is self-aware. And then there's this superconscious mind, which is more like your guidance system. I call it the GPS, like in a car, when you program in something and it tells you how to get there, except I define GPS as greater personal self, GPS.
Greater personal self.
Your greater personal self, once you make friends with that part of you, and first of all, become aware that everybody has a GPS, a greater personal self, then you can begin to link and bond with that part of you, come to understand it, come to partner with it, and then the guidance system in life becomes a heck of a lot better than just guessing what your next move is. But you can have, some people call it intuition. You could call it spiritual intuition. You could call it a hunch or whatever. But whatever it is, it's not an intellectual kind of thing. It's not your conscious mind trying to figure out solutions to problems. It's the part that you ask of your greater mind, okay, so what's going on here? What's the lesson? And what do I need to do?
And you also talk about a creative tension that needs to exist when levels of consciousness kind of, get to the realization that something needs to change. So
Right.
say, for instance, you're wanting to implement a change and you believe in your life, and yet your habit indicates, your subconscious habits indicate something else. So basically,
Right.
there is a clash that
Mm-hmm.
creates a tension, which
Yeah.
is very dynamic.
The part of your mind that's aware of the tension is your conscious mind. That's what your conscious mind is for. It thinks abstractly, for one thing. It's one of its qualities and characteristics. It discerns what is desired. It looks at your life and says, is this working for me? Is this not working for me? What would I want instead? That sort of thing. It's the one that actually sets your goals in life. What I'm suggesting is the more of a connection there is between your conscious mind and your spirit mind, if you will, the superconscious mind, the clearer the guidance is, the better your choices become. So at its highest order of gift, in my opinion, in terms of Psyche in the world, is ultimately it's to unite your subconscious, conscious mind, and superconscious mind in an integrated whole. Thoughts, actions, and outputs, in other words, how you're expressing your life, comes from the highest order of who you really are, which is a spiritual being having a human experience. Not a human being trying to be spiritual. But most of us have it backwards. And in our society, most of the time we are told we're just an individual that can't make much difference in the world anyway, so don't bother to try, and we're not important. And that's not true at all. We are all incredibly important part of the divine consciousness as a whole. Any one of us missing takes away from that consciousness. So we're all divinely equal, I would say, in that sense. In other words, look at it from the point of view of everybody has intrinsic value because we're all a thought in the mind of the divine expression. That's how I would see
You
it.
know, I love that because, and it's one of the reasons why I got very attracted to the whole idea of Psyche, because I'm very passionate about the idea of bringing spirit to the everyday experience. Basically, because we are not going to looking for a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings that are waking up to our essence, and therefore, we don't need to go anywhere, or we don't need to follow any path. We just need to awaken to our essence, basically, which may sound a little bit, woo woo, but as we, see evidence from metaphysics and all the most recent developments in science, and the evidence of what the results you've been getting with Psyche, it's so much more empowering if the individual comes from the perspective of, yes, I am a spiritual being having a human experience, isn't it? Because it really, well, brings you back to the source, shall we say, to a deeper sense of identity and possibility, rather than trying to stretch your arm to get somewhere you don't really know where it is, right? And then, yeah. Um, and then also the aspect of a new spirituality that is based on freedom and integrity and possibility, rather than, oh, I'm not spiritual because I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I think what, for me, the paradigm here is a complete shift of what it is we understand by spirituality. And I think Psyche gives you very beautiful tools of how to learn how to connect to your spiritual self, shall we say, in everyday life, right? I was reading like cases you had of healing, spontaneous physical healing, of
Sure.
people that literally aligned themselves to that field and had incredible results, right? Can you share some story?
Well, there are lots of stories. Psyche is taught all over the world in probably 10 or more languages now.
Uh-huh.
And remember, it's been around, as you know, but I don't think your listeners do, since 1988 and 89. That was the beginning of it. In fact, it was late. It was December, about this time of year in 1988, when the first sense of a series of, I'll call them transmissions. These were not things that I sat down with and tried to figure out and created intellectually. They were really gifts that were given to me to give to the planet during this time. So it became my mission. Once I left the corporate world and I entered the world as a psychotherapist, I decided to do that because I thought I could make more of a difference helping people one-on-one than I could managing a cable television system. And I didn't even watch TV and didn't think much of it anyway. So I felt like it was the height of hypocrisy. Here I am, sort of managing this cable television system, and I didn't watch my own product.
Yeah.
And so this disconnect inside from my spirit to my wallet,
Yes.
very, very well. And I was married and had 2 children, and so I felt the responsibility of being able to make a living, and I couldn't figure out how to do that essentially spiritually. So I stayed there as long as I could, and then I realized I had a skill, but I didn't realize that it had a name in business, and that was counseling. Turns out I'm very good at people who were very upset coming into my office, and it was a cable television business, and so in the sense of that, we had customer service representatives, people that were on the phones taking calls from people who were angry because their cable TV wasn't working right, and they didn't know the soap opera was interrupted, and this is a big deal in their life, or some sporting event they didn't get to see the outcome of or something, and so they would call, and their lives were just that compressed into, those were real important things to them. And they would yell and say really ugly things to the people that were on the phone.
Oh, God.
And they would come into my office crying oftentimes, the customer service representative, and she would say, this man said all these awful things to me, or this woman was yelling and screaming at me, and I can't take it. And so we would sit for a few minutes, and I had no specific training in this, but it was just, I think it's just part of my personality. People would calm down, they would feel nurtured, I would be able to talk them through it pretty well, they'd feel better, they thanked me, they went out and they did their job again.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed over time that that was more natural for me than doing the job I was hired to do.
Yes, yes, yes.
I could do it, and I was good at it, but it didn't satisfy me. The
But
most
then,
satisfying things were
but
counseling.
then later also in your path,
Yeah,
as a psyche practitioner already, you had the chance of also having almost like miraculous results with people that were able to reverse like
yeah. When psychic,
uncurable diseases like Crohn's disease,
right, that's right.
completely unintentionally, right? It was not.
That's what showed me that it was my path. The
Yeah.
information was given to me more or less at a time of high frustration. I was trying to teach a course in some other kind of modality that I had learned. I studied many things when I was in Denver, Colorado, and many things were available: NLP and hypnotherapy and Reiki and Touch for Health and educational kinesiology and just a whole bunch of things. And I was hungry for information. I was in that workshop junkie stage,
Mm-hmm.
exploration. I went to everything because I thought, boy, one of these I have to find the answer. And none of them actually felt complete inside me. They always felt like they had a piece of the puzzle. Yeah, that made sense, but there was something still missing, so I kept seeking. Until one day, like I said, in the latter part of December of 1988, in kind of a state of anger and rage, really. I was saying, okay, God, if you don't want me to do this, what do you want me to do? Because I messed up on a flyer I was putting together, and I was not in the full lotus position in a deep
Yeah,
meditation. I was
yeah.
ranting. And when I said that out loud, what do you want me to do instead? If you don't want me to do this, what do you want me to do instead? In anger, all of a sudden, there were pictures in my head like a teleprompter in a TV station where words were going across the screen very slowly, and I could read them. I don't visualize on command, so it was really weird for me.
Mm-hmm.
There it was, and I'm watching these words, and I was outside by this time where I could yell, and I went back into my house to my little computer, and I started typing into the computer what I saw in my head. And at the end of that, there was a whole pattern of change. It's called a core belief balance.
Yes.
13 paired statements, opposites, all the instructions on how to use this pattern. It takes about maybe 40 to 45 minutes to
Yeah.
facilitate. It's taught in the advanced psyche class. And I mean, it wasn't then because there was no advanced psyche class. It was just this pattern in my head that I had typed down. Once I got it on paper, then the vision went away in my head. I never could make it come back, but I had a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
So from that, I read that paper and I thought, wow, this is truly amazing.
Amazing. Rob, can you explain a little bit about the concept of the integration of the two hemispheres of the brain and the fact that so much is possible when you have a whole perfect combination between left and right,
Yeah,
and how it is that it actually can produce very profound transformations in minutes or seconds, I would say, in some
right.
cases.
It turns out that there was a lot of research done earlier on in our in last decade or so. Well, it's longer than that ago. It's probably in the 50s and 60s where most of this split brain research, it's called, was done in the United States and in other countries. And what they were discovering was they were trying to discover a cure for epilepsy, actually. And what they found was that if an epileptic seizure began, they could monitor it in one hemisphere of the brain. There is a left and a right hemisphere, and they're different. But there's a series of fibers that, in fact, millions of them, called a corpus callosum. It's a twisted pair of a whole bunch of these fibers. So the communication link between the hemispheres has to cross this bridge, if you will, of fibers. So they found out that if the epileptic seizure started in one side of the brain, if they severed that connection, they didn't know what it did. This was an experiment. This is what science does. So they would sever the connection, and they would find out then that the energy pattern that was on one side of the brain, the epileptic seizure, could not spread to the other side. Because when it did, sometimes people's seizures would get so violent that they would swallow their tongues, choke to death. They would die. It was a life-threatening situation. So they thought they had developed and discovered a cure for epilepsy. Well, in doing so, of course, with a lot of things happen in science, they didn't see the side effects. They didn't see the other part. They literally cut the communication off between one hemisphere and the other, so there was no crosstalk.
Yeah.
And we found out then, actually, by studying people who had had this procedure done, that the left and right hemisphere actually function very differently. Left hemisphere was more analytical and logical, and it's where the primary speech center was for the brain. It puts things to, it doesn't put things together, it takes things apart.
Yeah.
It's analytical, rational, and all that. But the right hemisphere is just the opposite. And they discovered that if you're just using one or the other, you're very limited in your response ability, your ability to respond to life's challenges. So in that research, it led to the research of whole brain integration. With what happens when you can stimulate both hemispheres of the brain at the same time, creating, in a neuroscience way of talking about it, a bilateral symmetrical brainwave pattern, meaning same on the both sides. So if it's same on both sides of the brain, both hemispheres are available, and it's bringing all of your resources together.
Yeah.
That's the optimal way to go through life. And plus, the big deal for PSYCH-K was when you're operating out of what we call a whole brain state, adding a new belief at the subconscious level to your mind is much simpler than standing in front of a mirror and saying, I love myself, I love myself. And having the mirror say back to you, no, you don't, no, you don't. Here are all the reasons you should, you don't deserve it, and all that. So, boy, was that ever revelatory. Then doing affirmations, we don't really do them. They don't call them affirmations because they're generally too abstract for the subconscious to understand. The subconscious mind does not process like the conscious mind. It really has to, you have to talk to it in very concrete, what's called sensory-based language. Things like what will you see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. Those are the senses of the subconscious mind. And if you talk to it in its language, you create a statement of belief, a desired statement that if it were true, would produce a different way of thinking and behaving in the world, which is the core essence of the processes of PSYCH-K. Then all of a sudden, you reduce the resistance to change and accept the idea because now you're operating in a whole brain state. And there, as you know from taking the workshop, there are several ways you can create this whole brain state and then introduce the idea. That's why change is possible in a few minutes instead of years and years of...
Yeah, it's almost like magical and almost like too good to be true. But hey, I have to say, I was very, very impressed with what I saw. And it's you know, as Rob usually shares with people in a very natural and open way, it was not actually him even like figuring out exactly how the process would take place. It's a combination of obviously his experience. He's a very experienced and wise man, and he has gone through all sorts of trainings as he has shared today. But there's also a level of putting things together and adding a level of higher consciousness to the process that has almost like brought this whole idea to a synthesis level, and which you know, it leads me to the point of really wondering, Rob, what it is that PSYCH-K can do not only to the individual level but also to the collective level, and I would love to talk to you about that in the next segment, and to actually concentrate now on the applications of PSYCH-K to how it is that we can live in the world and make a difference. You know, so many people these days are like, oh my God, you know, this is all happening. The world is scrambling. I don't know what to do. It must be bad. Perhaps it's not so bad. Perhaps there's a reason for all this, and I guess we are, you know, moving towards a complete and deep awakening of the planet, and I'm sure Rob has some great ideas about that. So bear with us. We'll be back the next segment. Rob, thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom with us. And yeah, we'll be back soon in the second segment of this show with Rob Williams on PSYCH-K. Thank you.